Hello everyone, and welcome to the Redox Connection, where we dive into our beautiful bodies, learning how to take responsibility for our overall well-being. With us today, Dr. Ray Dixon from Phuket. Hello, Dr. Ray.
Monica from Thailand.
I'm Liana. I'm a holistic wellness coach, and I love inspiring and assisting people to their own full potential. Now, the topic today with Dr. Ray, who, as you may know, is a chiropractor, naturopath, with over 40 years of experience and one of the world's first redox educators. We're going to ask Dr. Ray to help us understand one of our incredible systems, which is a cardiovascular system. When I asked Dr. Ray, let's discuss this today, he said, "Oh, great, that's one of my favorites." Actually, they're all my favorites. And I just smiled. Isn't that true, Dr. Ray?
Oh, it's very true. Every system is fantastic. And they're all part of the overall system, of course, which is the human body.
Yes. So let's understand a bit more about our heart.
Well, cardiovascular is actually your heart and your blood vessels. So it's a lot more extensive than beyond the heart. From the heart's perspective, though, it's an extraordinary organ. It's generally understood primarily as a pump, but really there's 4 chambers to the heart to receive the blood being returned from either the lungs, oxygenated, or from the body after the oxygen's been delivered around the human body. And then the blood comes into those upper receiving chambers before it then goes into the 2 lower pumping chambers. So the receiving chambers are called the atria, or atrium, which is singular, atria is plural. And then they pass through major valves, which we can talk about later because they can be affected with disorders, to the ventricles. And the ventricles, right and left, are the pumping chambers. So there's 3 layers to the heart. You've got an outer pericardial layer with a serous fluid-filled membrane around it. Then you've got the much thicker layer of the myocardium. Now, this is the muscular layer, which is why because that's what performs the major function of the heart, which is to pump. And then you've got a very inner layer called the endothelial layer, or the endocardium, which is what forms the valves. There's a number of valves. There's valves between those upper and lower chambers, but there's also valves from those lower pumping chambers when you enter the pulmonary artery or the pulmonary trunk, which then sends the blood on through the lungs to be oxygenated. And then there's another one as you exit the major left ventricle called the aortic valve. And they can be problematic on occasions, as well as other parts of these layers, including the myocardium, the muscular layer. The cardiac myocytes are the individual cells of that myocardium. They are what do the pumping, so they're cardiac myocytes. And they're pretty extraordinary, as all cells are, but in this instance, they do a lot of work. If you imagine pumping 14,000 litres of blood through your body in 24 hours at rest, meaning you're not moving. So if you're moving, you're pumping more. Well, that's what the myocardium's doing. That's what these cardiac myocytes are doing. And we've talked before that the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria, which is where you actually make energy, the ATP. So you can imagine cardiac myocytes have a lot of mitochondria. They actually have up to 14,000 in one cell, which is very cool. So really, it's a fascinating topic, the heart, and I'll probably just cover the main points, but that's sufficient. Then, of course, the vasculature, cardiovascular. So the vasculature refers to the arteries, which then they're the major arteries that take the blood out into smaller arterioles. You can see these with the naked eye. But then you go down into capillaries. Now, capillaries are by far the most extensive network of blood vessels in the human body, delivering oxygen and nutrition and white blood cells of the immune system to the cells all over the body. They are microscopic. You can't see those with the naked eye. And in some cases, red blood cells travel through those capillaries in single file. Now, if you imagine there's 250 million red blood cells in one drop of blood. So if they're going through in single file, it just gives you an idea of how very, very tiny these capillaries can be. And by the way, one cell thick, one cell wall, very, very microscopic. And then those capillaries and that's where, by the way, the delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the cells occurs. It doesn't occur through the walls of the arteries and the arterioles. It occurs through the walls of the capillaries. Then the capillaries, of course, they've unloaded their oxygen, they've picked up waste, and then they will then feed the blood into venules, little tiny veins. And then those venules obviously coalesce into the major veins, and we can, again, macroscopically, we can see those even looking at the skin. And those veins then deliver that deoxygenated blood back to those atria receiving chambers of the heart. Now, just to conclude on the vasculature, it's estimated that there's up to approximately 100,000 kilometres of blood vessels in the human body.
Repeat that.
100,000 kilometres of blood vessels.
How extraordinary. And all this is happening while we are aware of it or not. Isn't that just fascinating?
Well, the autonomic division of the nervous system was taking care of that. There's an awful lot happening autonomically, because if you had to run it all, you would not survive. You'd be able to focus on the outside world, you'd be too busy trying to run the inside world, which obviously is not possible. So that's why we have an autonomic nervous system to take care of that. Now, just one last thing, because disorders can affect all of these things, all of these vessels. And as we come back up through the venous system, there are valves, which, your heart pumping can't maintain sufficient pressure to be pumping through 100,000 kilometres of blood vessels back to the heart again. So, the venous return relies on what's called the skeletal muscle pump. So a lot of your veins are not the ones you see superficially. They're deep, running through the skeletal muscles, like in your legs and your arms, for example, and others. And those skeletal muscles put pressure on the veins and help to push that blood back from your feet, for example, up to the heart. Skeletal muscles are always contracting to some extent, even when you sleep. And there's also valves in those veins, so that as the blood moves above a valve, it doesn't drop back into your feet, so to speak. And in fact, it's when those valves collapse that varicose veins occur. So that just gives you I'm highlighting that more to show you a little bit more about the vasculature. So that pretty much encompasses the cardiovascular system. Now remember, some of those arteries are the major ones going up to the brain as well, like the carotid arteries where we feel a pulse. By the way, where you feel a pulse, they are elastic arteries. They are part of what we've just been discussing. When you feel the pulse in the wrist, it's the radial artery. When you feel the pulse in the carotid artery, and the pulse is literally a pulse wave. So it's a wave of pressure passing down an elastic artery as the ventricles contract. So, and that's why it correlates with your heart rate, because it's literally caused by the contractions of the ventricles of the heart.
Absolutely in awe. The more I'm learning about just how incredible we are, the more you just go in awe, right? To see how sophisticated we are. Now, because underlining the topic really is always around the redox. What's the connection with redox? The question that would come is, are there redox signaling molecules in the heart or in the cardiovascular system?
Oh, absolutely. The redox signaling molecules are made in the mitochondria of cells. And so we just mentioned a moment ago, there's up to 14,000 mitochondria in one cardiac cell. So you can imagine there's trillions upon trillions upon trillions of redox signaling molecules being made every second of every minute of every hour of every day, helping to take care of those cells, because that's what redox molecules do. They regulate the genome, the DNA, And they regulate them in ways that are essential to healthy, normal functioning. So when you have malfunctioning cells, they need to be repaired. And this brings up another point, by the way, with cardiac muscle cells. Cardiac muscle cells, the same as neurons in the central nervous system, meaning the brain and the spinal cord, are considered predominantly to be incapable of reproducing themselves. That means as they die, they're not able to be replaced. So when you've got these billions of cardiac myocytes that are pumping for your entire lifespan at 14 litres per day without moving, so imagine if you are moving, that heart needs to see you through your life, because when it ceases, you cease. So the redox signaling molecules being made by those massive numbers of mitochondria inside of the cardiac myocytes are exactly what the heart runs on. The redox signaling molecules are underpinning the health and normal functioning of every cell. It doesn't matter whether it is a neuron or a cardiac myocyte or a hepatocyte of the liver, they all run on redox. And when they don't have enough redox molecules, you will be sick. When they don't have any redox molecules, you will be dead.
Right, there we are. Now, we are going to touch in the next episodes a bit of the dysfunctions of the system. Yet before we do that, my other main interest is how do we support ourselves to stay healthy and have a healthy cardiovascular system?
Well, the first thing is supplement with redox signaling molecules. The second is exercise. So that's why we hear so much about the benefits of exercise, even cardiovascularly, because essentially the resting heart rate, for example, which means the resting rate at which the heart pumps per minute, is much when you're fitter. That's why your pulse heart rate can be 50s as opposed to 70s or 80s. So that means the heart is healthier, so we can pump the same amount with a lot less pumps. So, and as you exercise, of course, and therefore the heart gets fitter, as does the rest of you, you're also producing a lot more redox signaling molecules. Because when you are fitter, you have more mitochondria. And when you have more mitochondria, you make more redox molecules because they're made in the Krebs cycle in the mitochondria. But there's other things, of course. I mean, there's diet. I mean, the more pollutants in the body, the more your diet is poor, the more you can be susceptible to plaquing and atherosclerosis and hardening of the arteries. And the more you can be vulnerable to infections that can affect the heart as well, the more you can be vulnerable to hardening and stenosis of those valves that we mentioned. So diet's important as always, nutrition is important, clean air, clean food, clean water, all the things that we talk about in general that are good for the entire health of the human body equally apply to the cardiovascular system. The systems are not separate when it comes to health, okay? We teach them as systems separately. They're not separate. They're interconnected. So your nervous system is interconnected. There's no system in the human body that is not wired into the nervous system. Your endocrine hormonal system affects pretty much, well, indeed, every cell in the human body as well, no matter what system it belongs to. I mean, so although we teach the system separately for education purposes, you've always got to keep in the back of your mind, they're not separate at all. They're all interconnected, but for teaching purposes it works.
Beautiful. More and more in love with all this topic and seeing the holistic side of it, right? Of how we taking care of everything while we're just taking care of our health. And brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Ray. I'm going to re-listen to this whole episode once again because there was so much good information there in such a short time. And I'm going to invite all of you to join us for the next series because once we've understood the system, we'll go and touch some of the the dysfunctions and how we can address them and how we can actually support ourselves. So see you in the next episodes, and just remember that healthy cells, healthy you, happy you. Thank you, Dr. Ray, and see you soon.